Looking at the monarchs who have been dubbed the Great, it is easy to become desensitized by its overuse. But one of the few ancient greats to truly deserve this lofty title was the founder and first King of Kings of the mighty Achaemenid Persian Empire, Cyrus II, otherwise known as Cyrus the Great. Welcome to our video covering the ascent to power of Cyrus and his actions that shaped the world in which we live. The sponsor of this video, Raid Shadow Legends, allows you to master hundreds of champions, millions of skill combinations and countless tactics to take on raid bosses, dungeon runs, campaign battles and PvP arena matches. Use our link below to download Raid to your mobile phone or PC. We mentioned bosses, and indeed bosses are the highlight of the game. One of the most challenging dungeon bosses out there is the Fire Knight, Fyro the Infamous. The best way to take Fyro's treasures? He's immune to debuffs and damage, so you'll need champions who can deliver multiple hits. For us, the best part of Raid is the variety, as anyone can find something to their liking, be it PvP, PvE, raiding, collecting champions and more. Raid's got many events this summer, as well as a load of new content. They've got a bunch of brand new champions coming out and a new rotation of the Doom Tower. If you want to get a huge head start in Raid, hit the link in the description or scan our QR code, and you'll get an epic hero, Chonoru, 200,000 silver, 1 XP boost, 1 energy refill and 1 ancient shard, so you can summon an awesome champion as soon as you get in game. All this treasure will be waiting for you here. Following the destruction of the Neo-Assyrian Empire in 612 BC, 4 powers dominated the region: Egypt, Lydia, Babylon and the Median Empire, whose territories stretched from eastern Iran to Cappadocia. One of its provinces was Persis, mountainous home to the subordinate kingdom of Anshan. Its rulers were the Achaemenid clan, said to be descended from an eponymous founder, Achaemenes. In myth, the Median prince Astyages had a prophetic dream that his pregnant daughter, Mandana, exuded water that would soon flood all Asia, so he wed her to one of these kings of Anshan, knowing that no son of a mere Persian would ever rule the great Median Empire. But he had another dream soon after, in which vines grew from Mandana's womb to engulf the entire world. Terrified, paranoid Astyages decided to kill her child when it was born. This boy, known as Kurosh by Old Persian pronunciation, but to us as Cyrus, came into the world at the royal palace of Ecbatana in 600 BC. Astyages immediately ordered one of his senior men, Harpagus, to take the baby, kill him, and dispose of the body far away. Harpagus said that he would do as ordered, and took the boy home. Unwilling to kill the child, but fearing Astyages' wrath, Harpagus ordered a shepherd, Mithridates, to do the deed for him. However, rather than killing the young Cyrus, Mithridates and his wife secretly raised him as their own son. Harpagus had no idea, and neither did Astyages. One day, Cyrus, then known in his secret existence as Agradetes, was playing king and court with a few other boys, one of whom was the son of a Median magnate. As part of their game, King Cyrus ended up whipping the noble boy, who then subsequently complained to his father about the incident. The perpetrator was summoned to answer before Astyages, who quickly discerned that he was the boy Harpagus had been ordered to kill. Astyages feigned calm, explaining to Harpagus that he had often felt remorse for the order, and that his actions were actually to be celebrated with a feast. At Astyages' order, Harpagus sent his 13-year-old son to the palace, and then arrived later himself as a guest. During the feast, Astyages made Harpagus eat his own son, and although the courtier claimed, "Whatever you do, sire, is agreeable to me," he would forever bear a grudge. Meanwhile, Cyrus was spared, and even went on to become royal cupbearer, a position of considerable prestige. The young Persian also served as a royal envoy and advisor, becoming indispensable to Astyages. Cyrus also wed Casandana, a fellow Achaemenid and the love of his life. At the same time, Harpagus had been gathering the anti-Astyages nobles and befriending Cyrus. In 552 BC, they decided to act. The prince, who was now in his 40s, made his way back to his homeland and razed it in revolt. After winning an initial battle there and another on the border between Persia and Media, Cyrus and his allies crushed Astyages' army outside Pasargadae after Harpagus betrayed Astyages, taking Ecbatana soon thereafter. Almost immediately, Median governors in Hyrcania, Parthia and Bactria submitted as well. The Achaemenid Empire, which was at its beginning a collaboration between Persia and Media, was born. In the aftermath, Cyrus dutifully administered his newly won domain. His territories were divided into semi-autonomous provinces known as satrapies, and were governed by satraps, drawn initially from Persians and Medes alike. Overseers were sent to supervise these lesser rulers, and 10,000 of Cyrus's greatest warriors were instituted as the notorious spear-wielding immortals, whose ranks never went below that number. The King of Kings did all this under the cover of friendship treaties enacted with his powerful neighbours Babylon and Lydia. However, buoyed in confidence by a famously deceptive answer from the oracle at Delphi, Lydian King Croesus began mobilizing forces to assault this up-jumped Persian usurper. By 548 BC, likely informed by expertly employed spies as to the military buildup at the Halys River, Cyrus sent envoys to the Ionian Greeks, asking them to stay out of the upcoming war. However, cities loyal to Lydia refused outright, with the exception of Miletus. This decision among the Aegean Greeks would eventually, over half a century later, trigger the legendary Greco-Persian Wars of Salamis and Thermopylae. Crossing the Halys, and therefore the Achaemenid frontier by bridge in 547, Croesus and his large army approached Pteria and put it under siege. Hearing of the invasion at his capital of Ecbatana, Cyrus marched west to confront the Lydians, joined at multiple stages by loyal armies from the satrapies. The core of his force consisted of Persians and Medes, but there were also Hyrcanians, Sacae and many others. Pteria had already fallen, and its people sent to Lydia as slaves when the Achaemenid army, probably lesser in size than the Lydian one, arrived. Sure in his ability to defeat Cyrus, the Lydian king drew up for battle, but in the clash that lasted the full day, the Persian center smashed straight through and badly bloodied his army, leading Croesus to withdraw to Sardis. The Lydian king expected that winter would stop the hostilities, so he sent emissaries to the allied Babylon, Egypt and Sparta, calling on them to send armies in 5 months to assist him. Crucially, he also sent all his mercenaries away with similar orders. However, bucking the trend of warfare in this period, Cyrus pushed into Lydia and encamped in sight of Sardis. Croesus sent a formidable cavalry army out to face the Persians. Harpagus advised that their own cavalry be mounted on camels and form the vanguard in order to spook the Lydian horses. When the battle was joined, this maneuver succeeded, and Croesus, despite heavy losses, was able to retreat into the fortress of Sardis. Before the Persians encircled the city, Croesus managed to send out pleas for assistance now. However, after just a 14-day siege, one of the greatest Near Eastern capitals fell. After that one lightning campaign, Sardis and all of Asia Minor was now Achaemenid territory. Croesus himself was eventually spared and brought to advise Cyrus. The oracle was correct, but he had destroyed his own mighty empire rather than that of the Persians. Although expansion via conquest does not seem to have been a priority for the Persian king before the Lydian invasion of his territory, it is all but certain that he would have set out to dominate the region at some point. Following the annexation of Croesus' kingdom, Cyrus and his generals set about creating a great new capital at Pasargadae, in addition to subduing resistance in peripheral territories such as Bactria and Urartu. By 542 BC, Cyrus's attention was focused on another great power ripe for conquest, the so-called Neo-Babylonian Empire. Far from the good old days of Nebuchadnezzar II, the current Babylonian king, Nabonidus, wasn't a good ruler. He diverted favor and funding away from Babylonian priests, neglected the common people, stopped renovation works on the city, and even cancelled the New Year's festival of the great god Marduk. Discontent was rife, and loyalty to the king and his son Belshazzar was at an all-time low, and Cyrus was all too aware of this state of affairs. Persian infiltrators began spreading word throughout Nabonidus' empire that Cyrus intended to restore Marduk's supremacy in Babylon. In 540, sensing that the time was right, Cyrus dispatched his army to seize Babylon-dominated Elam with the help of a native revolt. This blow brought Nabonidus back from his retirement and to Babylon, where he took control of the army. Notoriously, he seized the sacred statues of his many domains in order to ensure their obedience. The next year, Cyrus and his increasingly powerful army marched south to invade the Babylonian Empire, but he would do it as a liberator. However, their progress was blocked for weeks by a swollen tributary of the Tigris River just north of Opis. Although the obstacle was overcome by Persian troops digging many channels around the river to divert its course, this delay allowed Nabonidus to assemble a large army and advance north. The king himself, however, remained ensconced at Sippar, while General Gabara conducted the war. The battle took place in the last days of September near Opis. What we do know is that Cyrus's forces, fighting under the gold and red Shabaz standard, won yet another crushing victory. Opis was plundered, while Gabara surrendered, earning a place in the Persian hierarchy. Nabonidus went south by river. Rather than facing another hostile army in the field, Cyrus instead arrived with his vast host outside the massive, sprawling city of Babylon to find Nabonidus' armies bivouacked inside, braced for an extensive siege. It would, even to the indomitable Cyrus, have been a truly daunting sight. Its defences included multiple layers of moat, the great Euphrates River itself, and two colossal walls, inner and outer, 80 feet high or more, stretching for 15 miles around the city's near triangular circumference. Tidy grid-patterned districts were crisscrossed with streets and occupied by grand-scale residences, temples, palaces, and, most sturdy of all, the great citadel of the Royal Guard next to the Ishtar Gate. As he usually did, King Cyrus called together his advisors for a council of war immediately upon arrival, and debated upon how to best gain the city. A full-scale assault, they decided, would result in massive casualties, so they decided on a complex strategy relying on subtlety, intelligence, and timing. First, to maintain the illusion of a conventional siege, the Achaemenid king split his army in two, stationing one on the eastern bank of the Euphrates, where the river entered Babylon in the north, and the other downstream, where the river left it. Cyrus himself took every non-combatant, including servants, slaves, and attendants, north, arriving soon thereafter at a basin, which had been excavated years earlier to temporarily redirect the river. Putting his men to work for a similar end, Cyrus had a wide channel dug from the disused basin to the river, and chopped giant palm trees down to act as levees to redirect the water. When the earth was removed, a great portion of the Euphrates' flow was diverted into the basin rather than flowing towards Babylon. While Xenophon informs us that the water level before this ingenious work was over 2 men deep, Herodotus states that after, the Euphrates was only waist deep. The impassable river was now a viable entry route into the city. That very night, carefully timed because it marked the advent of a great festival of music, drinking, and revelry in Babylon, Cyrus had Gabara infiltrate the city via the diminished river, which the celebratory citizens or guards of Nabonidus' capital didn't seem to have noticed. The defenders, lulled into a false sense of security by their great strength of defense and enfeebled by drink, were unable to resist the Persian infiltration. By daybreak, Prince Belshazzar was dead, the gates were opened, and the city was under Achaemenid control. Nabonidus, who had actually been in nearby Borsippa, was surrendered to the Persian monarch, and then allowed to take a comfortable and by all accounts happy exile in Comania. 2 weeks after he captured the city and dealt with all the necessary formalities, on October 26, 539, Cyrus entered Babylon to a rapturous welcome, restoring Marduk's priesthood to its elevated position and tending to the needs of the people. To further show his benevolence, the new ruler kept taxes to a minimum, completed several public works, and returned idols seized by Nabonidus. The verse account of Nabonidus sums up what the people, or at least the favoured priests, may have felt. They are like prisoners when the prisons are opened. Liberty is restored to those who were surrounded by oppression. All rejoice to look upon him as king. In a famous act that would gain him unabashed plaudits within the pages of the Hebrew Bible, Cyrus the Great returned thousands of Jews who had previously been deported as part of Nebuchadnezzar's so-called Babylonian exile to Jerusalem. Not only did he restore Jews to their homeland, but it's also said that Cyrus ordered the construction and state funding of what eventually became Jerusalem's Second Temple. For this generosity, he was the only foreigner ever to be named a Messiah in the Jewish religion. Without this, it's possible that Judaism would have died out, while Christianity and Islam might never have existed at all. Following the Persian annexation of Babylon and its rich empire, the only possible rival remaining to Cyrus was Egypt, but that particular issue of imperial expansion would wait until after the founder's death. There is a gap in the ancient sources after about 539, during which the great king probably administered his provinces, stabilized the empire, and laid down building blocks that would provide a strong foundation for centuries of prosperous rule. Xenophon tells us that when the king wasn't out on campaign with the army, he would reside for 7 months of the year in Babylon, where there was a warm and sunny climate. When spring came, Cyrus moved to Susa for 3 months, and in summer climbed to Ecbatana in the Median Highlands, where the cooler climate was more tolerable. He would only visit Pasargadae 7 times during his reign, while Persepolis was a later construction. The famine in our sources ends with the multifaceted and intensely debated matter of Cyrus the Great's death. Soldier historian Xenophon, writing over a century later, believed that the first Persian king died in his bed, while the Greek physician Ctesias claimed Cyrus's death was due to wounds received in battle. Herodotus, however, tells us undoubtedly the most fantastic and epic tale of how the first King of Kings came to an end. In the late autumn of 530 BC, with his new hegemonic empire organized and set to rights, Cyrus took his army to confront a deadly new foe. After a long march across Iran, the Persian force came to the northeastern steppe frontier of the empire, in what is today Kazakhstan and Uzbekistan. There, a ferocious Scythian tribe, known as the Massagetae, were gathering a massive army of both infantry and the famous nomadic cavalry. Arriving in the vicinity of the Araxes River, where the Massagetae were located at the time, Cyrus, who seems to have become arrogant from all his successes, was informed that the previous chieftain of this bothersome people was dead. In his place ruled the daunting Amazon-esque Scythian queen, known to us as Tomiris. Cyrus readied his forces, but also dispatched an offer of marriage to the queen in hopes of a diplomatic conquest. This was swiftly rebuffed. The savvy queen knew that Cyrus only had an eye for her domain rather than her. While the Persians were in the process of constructing a pontoon over the Araxes, messengers arrived from Tomiris bearing an offer of her own. "Cease, King of the Medes, from that on which you are intent, for you cannot know if the completion of this work will be to your advantage. Cease, and be king of your own country, and be patient to see us ruling those whom we rule." Having made this brazen decree, Tomiris decreed that the bridge was unnecessary. Either she would retreat 3 days from the river and willingly fight the Persians there on open ground, or the Persians could let the Massagetae cross instead, whichever was to their liking. Gathering his advisors, all but one of them recommended that Cyrus withdraw and then break Tomiris against the river. The one dissenter was Croesus, deposed king of the Lydians, who counseled the Achaemenid ruler to cross onto the far side. Cyrus took his advice and did just that. Then, after setting up a luxurious camp and then feigning a retreat, the Persians lured a third of the Massagetae army, who feasted and drank the spoils. Then this force, led by Tomarus' son, was set upon by the whole Persian army and destroyed. Tomarus' son killed himself, and his mother swore to avenge him by giving Cyrus the blood he clearly desired. On December 4th, 530 BC, the armies of Cyrus and Tomarus clashed. At long range, the nomads and their Persian foes were evenly matched, both peoples being brilliant archers. However, when the Massagetae got in close, their heavy bronze armor and brutal battle axes ripped the Achaemenid army to ribbons. Almost all of it was annihilated, and Cyrus was killed, either on the field or from his wounds a few days later. Tomarus fulfilled her vow by finding the Persian king's head and drenching it in blood from an animal skin. Somehow, by negotiation or daring deed which we know nothing about, Cyrus's remains came to rest at the tomb of Cyrus in Pasargadae, a remnant of the ancient world that still exists more or less intact to this day. At the time of Alexander's conquest 200 years later, there was an inscription on the tomb that read, "I am Cyrus, son of Cambyses, who founded the Empire of Persia and ruled over Asia. Do not grudge me my monument." More videos on the history of Iran are on the way, so make sure you are subscribed and have pressed the bell button to see the next video in the series. Please consider liking, commenting and sharing, it helps immensely. Our videos would be impossible without our kind patrons and YouTube channel members, whose ranks you can join via the links in the description to know our schedule, get early access to our videos, access our Discord and much more. This is the Kings and Generals channel, and we will catch you on the next one.